Welcome to the deep dive. If you're like most people today, you've probably had those times, right? Running on fumes, feeling constantly reactive, just buzzing. We call it stress. But our source material today makes this really critical, maybe life-altering distinction that we need to dig into.
Yeah.
The difference between that short-term stress, the kind that actually helps us survive, and the destructive long-term chronic stress that's really wearing us down.
Yeah, it's a huge difference.
So our mission today is to understand how this emergency system, which is designed for adaptation, can actually become the source of some really deep physical damage.
And that distinction is just so crucial because, chronic stress isn't just some vague feeling of being overwhelmed. It's actually a defined physiological condition.
Okay.
Our research defines it as the body's response, physiological or psychological, that's triggered by a long-term stressor, internal or external.
Long-term being the key phrase there.
Exactly. And what makes it so insidious, so tricky, is that the trigger doesn't even have to be a current physical threat. Just thinking about recollecting or even anticipating a prolonged problem.
Like money worries. Or a tough job situation.
Yes, financial insecurity, daily work pressure, maybe living in a difficult or threatening neighborhood environment, things like that. They can all induce the same destructive biological response as an immediate danger.
Okay, let's unpack that core system a bit then. We know the stress response is fundamentally adaptive, right? It's the classic fight or flight mode. And it's designed to get us back to homeostasis, back to balance, when there's danger. When we activate this system, the endocrine process kicks in, releases corticosteroids to help us cope.
Right.
And this dynamic adaptive change that maintains stability through change is called allostasis. It's the body's protective short-term balancing act.
You can think of allostasis as the body's highly effective emergency response system, really effective in the short term. Those stress hormones, they're actually beneficial then. Well, they sharpen your focus, they raise your pain threshold, prime your muscles for action. Really useful if you need to, run from a predator.
Okay.
But the problem isn't the response itself, the problem is the persistence. If that threat or perceived threat never really goes away.
Like the financial stress just keeps going.
Exactly. Then the system never switches off. And when that adaptive response runs hot, day after day, week after week, well, it starts damaging the very systems it was originally designed to protect.
Okay, so if allostasis is the adaptive process, the good guy in the short term, what do we call the consequence, the inevitable result of keeping that system cranked up to 11 all the time?
That's the key concept we really need to get our heads around today, allostatic load.
Allostatic load?
Yeah. Think of it as the cumulative wear and tear. It's the hidden cost that chronic stress takes on the body over time. When your adaptive system, your allostasis system, is constantly overstimulated, the resulting adverse long-term impacts pile up. They accumulate like debt. That debt is the allostatic load. It basically means your internal car engine is constantly redlining.
And eventually?
Eventually the engine blows, or at least starts seriously malfunctioning.
Let's ground this in its history a bit. We can't really talk about this debt without mentioning Hans Selye. He's often called the father of stress, right?
Absolutely, Hans Selye. Back in 1936, he developed this concept called the Degeneral Adaptation Syndrome, or GAS.
And his experiments, they were pretty intense, weren't they?
Oh, they were brutal, definitely. But essential for understanding this. He subjected lab mice to extreme physical stressors. We're talking starvation, excessive exercise, extreme cold or heat, really pushed them.
Okay, so physical trauma.
Yes. And what he found was genuinely surprising at the time. Regardless of the specific trigger, whether it was freezing the mouse or making it run until exhaustion, the mice showed this uniform set of internal injuries.
Uniform, so the same damage regardless of the cause.
Exactly. They all had enlarged adrenal glands. Their thymus gland deteriorated. That's crucial for immunity. And they developed gastrointestinal ulcers. Same pattern, different stressor.
So the body's response wasn't specifically tailored to the threat. It was just this generalized alarm going off.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to pause here for a sec. Selye was using physical trauma on mice.
Right.
But modern humans, most of us, we're dealing more with chronic psychological stress, aren't we? Mortgage payments, traffic jams, job insecurity. Does the research confirm that, say, a looming deadline triggers the same physical cascade as freezing a mouse back in the 30s?
That's a critical question, and the answer is fundamentally yes. The body doesn't always differentiate finely between a physical survival threat and a chronic psychological one.
Wow.
Celli defined those conditions. He saw the hormonal system breakdown, the high blood pressure, the heart problems. He called them diseases of adaptation.
Diseases of adaptation, meaning the body adapts itself into illness.
Precisely. In its ongoing effort to adapt to this persistent stressor, whether physical or psychological, the body effectively wears itself out, adapting itself into a state of illness. The brain interprets that chronic pressure as a survival threat. And boom, the same universal hormonal cascade Celli observed ticks in.
Let's look closer at that cascade then. When the threat is perceived, the sympathetic nervous system lights up. What's happening right in that moment?
Okay, so immediately you get this spike of epinephrine adrenaline, which constricts blood vessels, jacks up your heart rate.
Fight or flight prep.
Exactly, and norepinephrine too. But the hormone that really defines the chronic stress picture is cortisol.
Ah, cortisol. We hear a lot about that one.
We do, and its primary job is essentially resource management during a crisis. It raises your blood glucose levels, making sure every cell in your body, especially the ones needed for running or fighting, has instant, readily available energy.
Which is life-saving in a genuine short-term emergency.
Absolutely life-saving. But in a chronic state, when that cortisol's flooding your system constantly, that continuous high blood glucose, the elevated heart rate, the constant readiness, it just causes wear and tear everywhere.
And when that cortisol's washing through you day in, day out, the damage accumulates right down to our DNA, doesn't it? We touched on this, but it seems important. Chronic stress is linked to faster loss of telomeres.
Exactly right. Telomeres, they're like the protective caps on the ends of your chromosomes. You can think of them like the little plastic tips on shoelaces.
Okay.
They keep the DNA from fraying or unraveling when the cell divides and copies itself. Now, when those tips shorten too quickly, the cell copies become less reliable. It signals the cell is aging, getting worn out cellular senescence.
So shortening telomeres means faster aging.
Basically, yes. Accelerating telomere loss is pretty much synonymous with accelerating biological aging. That's how chronic stress, in a very real biological sense, makes you older faster.
Okay, once we grasp the chemistry, the cellular cost, the impact on the brain structure itself is, well, frankly, it's quite sobering when you read about it. Our source material really highlights the brain as a primary target for chronic stress damage.
This is often the aha moment for people when they really understand the burden of allostatic load. Chronic stress physically reshapes the brain. It's like this devastating zero-sum trade-off happening inside your head.
How so? What's the trade-off?
It causes neuronal atrophy, that means shrinking, and inhibition of growth in key areas like the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex.
And those are crucial for
memory, complex learning, rational thought, executive decision-making, your higher cognitive functions. So those areas shrink or become less active.
Okay. And the other side of the trade-off?
Simultaneously, it causes hypertrophy, which means enlargement and overactivity in the amygdala.
The amygdala, that's the fear center, right? Anxiety, aggression.
Exactly. The structure that processes fear, threat, anxiety, aggression. So chronic stress is essentially beefing up your internal alarm system, your fear center, while at the same time, it's inhibiting and shrinking the parts responsible for rational thought, calm memory recall, and self-control.
So you end up with a hyperreactive fear system and a weakened control center trying to manage it.
Precisely. You've got a shrinking executive branch being increasingly overruled by this over-muscled, hyperreactive fuel hub. And the consequences are what you'd expect. While this imbalance contributes to accelerated aging, it significantly impairs your ability to learn new things, makes decision-making sluggish and more fear-based, and it's linked to worsened outcomes if you have a brain injury, like a stroke.
And sleep. Does it mess with sleep too?
Oh, definitely. It fundamentally disrupts your sleep cycles, largely because those continuous high levels of cortisol are basically telling your body to stay awake and vigilant. Hard to sleep deeply when your alarm system is constantly on.
Wow. Okay, the damage clearly doesn't just stay in the head. Tell us about the systemic toll, the effect on major organs and systems throughout the body.
Well, the list is pretty comprehensive, unfortunately, because those stress hormones, especially cortisol, they circulate everywhere and affect nearly everything. You see profound disturbances in the immune system, digestive system, reproductive system, and cardiovascular system.
Let's take the cardiovascular system. We mentioned increased heart rate and blood pressure.
Right. And when that's sustained over the long term, that constant high blood pressure damages blood vessels. It makes the heart work harder than it should all the time. It can impair heart function, weaken the heart muscle itself. Ironically, the organ that's supposed to pump faster to help you escape danger gets worn out by being ready to pump faster all the time.
And the immune system. the one designed to protect us.
Fundamentally compromised. Prolonged stress dramatically reduces resistance to infection. It also seems to mess with inflammation regulation.
So, more likely to get sick.
Yes. And potentially worse, in some cases, this persistent activation can kind of confuse the immune system. It can lead to it misfiring and attacking the body's own healthy tissues. Autoimmune issues are sometimes linked here.
That seems incredibly counterproductive.
It is, and we see this play out in real-world observations. Our source material gives a really stark example. Dementia caregivers.
Right, I saw that.
The sustained, relentless psychological burden of caregiving. It translates directly into measurable physical consequences. Studies find these caregivers are significantly more susceptible to various diseases compared to non-caregivers of similar age and background.
So that's allostatic load in action. The psychological debt turning into actual physical vulnerability.
That's probably the clearest practical definition you could ask for. It shows how that hidden cost becomes very, very real.
Okay, so if chronic stress causes such uniform systemic damage, we're all potentially susceptible to ulcers, high blood pressure, weakened immunity. Why isn't everyone who faces prolonged strain suffering the exact same fate? Why do some people seem to, weather the storm better?
That's where the huge variability in individual response comes in. It's a critical piece of the puzzle. The intensity and the duration of our biological reaction to stress are highly individualized.
Makes sense. What influences that?
Numerous factors. Key among them are inherited genetic characteristics. Some people are just genetically predisposed to react more strongly or recover more slowly. The precise timing and duration of the stressors matter too. And then there's the operational efficiency of our internal hormonal control centers.
Like the HPA axis.
Primarily the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, or HPA axis, yes. And also the HPT axis, involved in thyroid function. Think of the HPA axis as the main throttle for stress hormones like cortisol. Some people's throttles just seem to get stuck in the on position more easily or take longer to power down.
It's interesting. I found one specific finding in the source material about socioeconomic status really counterintuitive. It suggested that people from wealthier backgrounds actually showed a stronger biological stress response in some studies than those in lower socioeconomic strata.
Yes, that's a fascinating and complex finding. It really illustrates that vulnerability isn't just about lacking resources. It shows how our systems can be calibrated differently based on a whole range of life experiences and perhaps expectations. It demonstrates that the biological mechanisms are nuanced, they're complex, and you can't just reduce it to simple exposure rates equals damage.
Okay.
And this variability leads us directly to the concept of resilience.
Like the ability to bounce back.
Exactly. Resilience is defined as the ability to cope with stresses in a healthy, adaptive manner, minimizing the negative impact. And our sources actually break down the resources that influence our resilience into 6 broad categories. These are quite useful, almost like a checklist for listeners to think about their own resources.
Okay, what are they?
First is personality factors. Things like optimism, a sense of commitment, viewing challenges as controllable. Second, ego-related traits, so self-esteem, self-efficacy, locus of control, basically believing you have some agency.
Okay.
Third, social connectivity. This is huge, the strength and quality of your support network, friends, family, community. Fourth, cultural views, like your religious or moral beliefs that can provide meaning, context, and coping strategies. Fifth, behavioral skills. This is things like having good social skills, knowing how to manage your emotions effectively, problem-solving abilities. And finally, the 6th category is kind of an other bucket, which includes things like overall socioeconomic status and your general physical health baseline.
That's actually quite empowering because looking at that list, maybe half of those factors, social connections, behavioral skills, even some aspects of personality like optimism, seem like things we can actively work on or cultivate.
Absolutely.
So you could potentially improve your resilience, effectively help your own HPA axis calm down a bit faster.
That's the hope, and a lot of therapeutic approaches are built around strengthening those very resources.
But if the response is so individualized and the coping resources are so varied, it must make studying chronic stress incredibly challenging for researchers, right? How do you measure something so variable in a way that gives you reliable results across different people?
That is the major scientific hurdle. It's inherently complex because you're dealing with individual genetics, different cultural contexts, varying life experiences, and even different definitions of stress itself.
What are the biggest measurement problems?
Well, one critical difficulty is trying to measure cumulative stress exposure accurately, especially from the past. When researchers ask people to recall chronic pressures they faced years or even decades ago,
Memory gets fuzzy.
exactly, that data is highly compromised by memory decay, recall bias. We tend to forget or downplay the impact of that low-level grinding stress from 10 years back. It's hard to accurately quantify the dose of stress someone received historically.
Right, you just can't recall the full weight of that pressure with perfect accuracy years later.
Precisely. And another major issue is the lack of uniform scientific criteria for the duration needed to qualify stress as chronic.
Ah, so different studies might use different timelines.
Yes. The definition isn't standardized. For instance, some really important studies might define a chronic difficulty using a strict 4-week cutoff. If the major stressor lasted less than 4 weeks, it doesn't count as chronic in their analysis.
Okay.
But other studies might use longer periods, maybe 6 months, or even shorter ones, depending on the context. If different research teams are essentially using different clocks to measure the same variable.
It makes comparing results or building a unified picture really difficult.
Extremely difficult. It fragments our understanding and makes it hard to synthesize findings about allostatic load across the board.
Well, this has been an incredibly detailed deep dive into the true cost of living on high alert. Really eye-opening.
Yeah, I think if we synthesize the core knowledge here, the main takeaway is this. Chronic stress is far, far more than just a subjective mental state, more than just feeling stressed out.
Hey.
It is a persistent, high-cost biological condition. It literally, structurally alters your brain, shrinking those crucial areas for control and memory while supercharging your fear center. And systemically, it compromises your major body systems, cardiovascular, immune, digestive, essentially wearing you out from the inside through sustained high blood pressure, muscle atrophy potential, reduced immunity, the works.
So thinking about the listener, what does this all mean for you personally? I suppose understanding this critical difference between the helpful adaptive allostasis and the damaging cumulative allostatic load. That's the first step, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It helps you recognize the danger signs, those persistent symptoms, maybe frequent anxiety, tension headaches that won't quit, generalized muscle pain, difficulty concentrating. They aren't just minor inconveniences to push through.
No, they're physical red flags. They are potential indicators that your adaptive stress system has crossed that line from helpful to harmful and is now actively incurring that biological debt we call allostatic load. And that leads us maybe to a final provocative thought, building on that idea of resilience and historic exposure we talked about.
Okay.
We've established that our ability to cope now is strongly influenced by those protective resources: social support, self-control, optimism, skills that we've built up over time or perhaps didn't have the chance to build.
Right, the resilience factors.
Yes. So if stress impact is measured both by your current exposure but also by your historic burden and the resources you developed back then, consider this. How much of your current capacity to manage pressure today, or even your current physical vulnerability to disease, how much of that is actually dictated by the protective shields you either managed to build or perhaps lacked due to your environment or circumstances years or even decades ago?
Wow. So the past really echoes in our present stress response.
It seems very likely. The cost of chronic stress truly does seem to have a long memory in our biology. Welcome, everyone, to The Deep Dive. If you're looking for a crash course in, well, economic might, some pretty dramatic history, and profound paradoxes, you've definitely come to the right place today. We are doing a deep dive into a place that's often misunderstood, maybe idealized a bit too much, and always, always influential: California. Okay, let's kick this off with a statistic that's honestly kind of mind-bending, just to set the scene. California's gross state product, the GSP, right? As of late 2024, it's estimated at, get this, $4.17 trillion. Just let that sink in for a second. $4.172 trillion. If the Golden State suddenly decided, we're our own country now, it wouldn't just be some minor nation. It would instantly be the world's fourth largest economy.
Yeah, it's almost hard to wrap your head around that scale. You're talking about an economy bigger than major countries like Japan, trailing only giants like Germany, and the sheer range of industries packed into just one state is, well, it's staggering. Everything from cutting-edge global tech to world-leading agriculture.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do today. Our mission here. We've got this Stack of sources, history books, economic reports, geographical studies, and we want to quickly but thoroughly unpack the key things that created this powerhouse of really extreme contrasts. We'll go from its wild, almost unbelievable mythical naming through its often brutal history, its unique geography, sometimes really harsh geography, and the modern reality of its kind of two-track economy.
Right. And to really get the mindset, you need to remember two key things about how California sees itself. First, that nickname everyone knows, the Golden State. It points straight to gold, the historical driver, the myth that pulled everyone in. And second, the official state motto. It's just one word, Eureka, that Greek word, right? I have found it. It captures this persistent, almost frantic sense of discovery and maybe desperation, too, that's defined pretty much every era of its history.
Yeah, a place built on that promise of finding something huge, something new, and let's be honest, often finding it pretty violently. So before it was server farms and almond groves, California was literally, well, it started as fiction. The name itself, California, is probably the most fascinating bit of trivia because it wasn't real. It was basically like 16th century Spanish sci-fi.
It's amazing how fiction just became fact on the map for those early explorers. The name almost certainly comes from a Spanish epic published in 1510. It was called Las Sergas de Esplandian, The Adventures of Esplandian. And this wasn't some obscure text, This was like the blockbuster novel of its day, full of chivalry adventure. It really fired up the imaginations of explorers setting out from Spain.
Okay, so what did this novel actually say California was?
Well, it described California not as the coastline we know, but as this remote mythical island located at the right hand of the Indies. And crucially, it was supposedly loaded with two things the Spanish really, really wanted, gold and pearls. And ruling this island paradise, a powerful fictional queen named Calafia.
Queen Calafia. Okay, and who lived there with her?
This is where it gets even more fantastical.
Yeah.
The island was supposedly inhabited only by beautiful, dark-skinned women living like Amazons. They wore gold armor, didn't associate with men, fought fiercely, and, maybe the most spectacular detail, they bred griffins, the mythical half-eagle, half-lion creatures to use in battle.
Griffins. So, okay, Spanish explorers like Hernan Cortés are sailing up the coast of Baja California in the 1530s. A pretty harsh, dry place.
Right.
But they've got this story in their heads.
Exactly. They've been reading about Queen Calafia and her gold-armored Amazon warriors riding griffins. So even though they're looking at this arid peninsula, they slap the name California, this mythical gold-rich Amazon paradise, onto the actual land they find.
Wow. The sheer confidence, or maybe wishful thinking, to name a vast territory after a fictional island, that tells you a lot about the mindset driving the whole thing.
It really does. But of course, the reality they eventually found on the mainland was way more complex than any fantasy novel. So let's pivot from that mythical name to the deep history of the land before Europeans showed up.
We sometimes picture pre-Columbian North America as maybe simpler societies, but the sources we have paint a picture of incredible complexity and density here in California. What's a key example of that?
I think the sheer diversity is the most striking thing, culturally and linguistically. Before any Europeans arrived, this area was one of the most varied places in all of North America. You had all these different environments packed together, redwood forests, mountains, deserts, islands, which fostered incredible variety. Sources suggest there were over 70 distinct ethnic groups, maybe around 300,000 people living here, speaking nearly 100 different dialects from maybe half a dozen major language families.
That level of density, linguistically and culturally, is pretty remarkable. And it must have come from really knowing how to live in that varied and sometimes challenging environment.
Exactly. And when you look at indigenous innovations, managing the environment, what we call ecosystem management now, was absolutely fundamental. These groups didn't just live on the land, they actively shaped it. They used really sophisticated techniques like managing forests, almost like gardens, controlled harvesting, ensuring they had food and medicine available sustainably. It was a very stable way of managing resources.
And maybe the most relevant innovation, tragically, given the state's current challenges, has to do with fire, right?
Yes, absolutely. They practiced controlled burning. They would intentionally set small, low-intensity fires at specific times of the year. This cleared out the underbrush, reduced deadwood, promoted healthier growth. It also recycled nutrients and, crucially, prevented the kind of huge, catastrophic wildfires we see today. It was a practice honed over centuries, designed to work with the fire-prone climate, not just react to it.
And here's the kicker. That practice, seen as primitive by the newcomers, was actually outlawed by the state government in 1911.
right? It was banned, actively suppressed for decades. And that directly contributed to the massive buildup of fuel across California's landscapes.
It took until 2022 for the state government to finally officially recognize the value of this traditional indigenous knowledge and start programs working with tribes to bring back controlled burns over a century later.
It's a stark example of needing to relearn foundational knowledge that was here all along.
Now, beyond managing the land, the sources also point to a pretty intense cultural clash when the Spanish arrived, especially around social structures and identity.
Absolutely. One aspect of indigenous societies that the Spanish found deeply disturbing and actively tried to eliminate was the existence of individuals who didn't fit neatly into European male-female gender roles.
What kind of roles did these individuals have?
Well, the Spanish often used the term joyas, which means jewels, but was used negatively, pejoratively, to describe people, often assigned male at birth, who took on women's social and ritual roles. But the indigenous terms were much more specific and respectful. The Chumash, for example, called these individuals aki. They were often vital members of the community, performing essential ceremonial duties, maybe around funerals or mourning rituals. Sometimes they were specialized healers or mediators.
So these roles were integrated, recognized, and important within their own societies, but the Spanish saw it differently.
Completely differently. The sources are quite clear. Early Spanish settlers, military figures like Governor Pedro Fages back in 1775, they expressed disgust. They called it abominable, a vice, and they actively sought to eradicate the joyas, or aki. They saw their existence as fundamentally against European norms and Catholic beliefs. So colonization wasn't just about land. It was a direct assault on the cultural and social fabric, right down to gender identity.
That cultural clash really sets the stage for the next phase, the actual European takeover. The Spanish first showed up in 1542, but a permanent presence took a while longer.
Yeah, after Cabrillo sailed into San Diego Bay in 1542, and then Francis Drake popped up briefly for England in 1579, Spain didn't really make a serious move until the Portola expedition in 1769. That's when they decided they needed to secure Alta California, Upper California, against rivals like Russia or Britain potentially moving in.
And their main tool for securing it was religious colonization through the mission system.
Exactly. Spanish missionaries, famously led by figures like Junipero Serra, established a chain of 21 missions up the coast. They were all connected by El Camino Real, the King's Highway. These missions weren't just churches. They were large agricultural estates, centers of economic production, but also sites where indigenous people were forcibly brought, converted, and made to work. It was about assimilation and control. And, many of California's major cities today, San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, grew up around these original mission sites.
Okay, so that Spanish era lasts until Mexico wins independence in 1821. How did that shift things on the ground in California?
It was a huge shift, leading to a new elite class. The Mexican government eventually, around 1834, secularized the missions. Basically, they took the land away from the church. And this vast amount of land was then quickly granted out to private individuals, creating these enormous cattle ranches called ranchos.
And who got these massive land grants?
These went largely to the Californios. These were the Hispanic residents, often descendants of the original Spanish soldiers and settlers who were native to California. They formed a distinct landowning aristocracy. They became the dominant social and political force, living a life centered around cattle ranching and trade. They often saw themselves as distinct from, maybe even superior to, the government far away in Mexico City, and definitely distinct from the American settlers who would start arriving later.
But that California dominance didn't last very long at all, did it? The U.S. takeover was incredibly fast, starting in 1846 during the Mexican-American War.
Right, it was swift. The prelude was the Bear Flag Revolt in June 1846. A group of American settlers, likely with some encouragement from U.S. military figures nearby, declared the California Republic. It was very short-lived. William B. Ide was its only president for less than a month before U.S. forces officially raised the American flag and took control. The war ended, and the territory was formally ceded by Mexico in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in early 1848.
Okay, now here's where the timing gets absolutely explosive. California becomes part of the U.S., and literally 1 week before that treaty is signed, finalizing the transfer, gold is discovered.
Yeah, at Sutter's Mill, January 1848. That timing is just. It's the single most destabilizing event in the state's early history. It meant California didn't enter the U.S. as just another territory. It entered as the land of gold. Tangible, get-rich-quick wealth.
And the floodgates just opened. How dramatic was that population change? You mentioned maybe 8,000 settlers in 1846.
Right, a tiny number. By 1854, just 8 years later, that settler population had skyrocketed to over 300,000. It was an invasion, basically.
How did anywhere cope with that? The infrastructure, the government. It must have been complete chaos.
It was pure, unregulated chaos. There was no real infrastructure or effective governance to handle it.
Did?
Towns exploded overnight. Look at San Francisco, maybe 500 people in 1847. By 1870, it's this sprawling, often lawless port city of 150,000. It created this environment of intense greed, violence, speculation, but also immense opportunity for those who got lucky or were ruthless enough.
And that rush only accelerated once it got easier to get there, right? The Transcontinental Railroad in 1869.
Huge moment. Suddenly, that brutal, months-long overland journey or the dangerous sea voyage around South America, it became a trip of about a week from the East Coast. That just cemented California's place in the American imagination and ensured a steady flow of people and capital.
But this is where we have to confront the really dark side of the Golden State story, that gold rush, that boom. It happened alongside something historians now call the California Genocide.
It's a necessary term, even if it's horrifying. The historical sources are stark. This wasn't just accidental conflict deaths. It was, in many cases, deliberate policy and action. Between roughly 1846 and 1873, you have U.S. government agents, state militias, and regular settlers carrying out systematic massacres of indigenous Californians. Population estimates are hard, but the number killed during this period is thought to be somewhere between, say, 9,500 at the very lowest end, up to maybe 100,000. And this was after the devastating population losses already caused by disease during the Spanish and Mexican periods.
And the state's own leadership endorsed this?
Explicitly. California's very first governor, Peter Hardeman Burnett, said it plain as day in a message to the legislature in 1851. It's chilling, but worth hearing his actual words. That a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct must be expected. He basically called it inevitable, beyond anyone's power to stop. It reveals the deeply ingrained racism and, frankly, genocidal intent within the early state government.
And even though California came into the U.S. as a free state in 1850, banning slavery for African Americans, there was still a form of legalized bondage for indigenous people.
Yes, absolutely. The 1850 Act for the Government and Protection of Indians sounds protective, but it contained clauses that allowed Native people found loitering or orphaned children to be essentially indentured, which amounted to de facto slavery. And we have records showing this wasn't just some obscure law. The Los Angeles City Council actually approved auctions of indigenous people under this act. These auctions happened openly for almost 20 years. So settling California involved incredible violence, forced removal, and state-sanctioned killing to make way for the gold seekers yelling, "Eureka!"
That brutal history is intertwined with the land itself, but the state's lasting economic power comes from its geography, too, a geography of just incredible extremes, often packed really close together.
The topography is definitely one of its defining features. How quickly the landscape changes is just wild. Think about this. You've got Mount Whitney, the highest point in the lower 48 states, over 14,500 feet. And then, less than 90 miles away horizontally, maybe 140 kilometers, you plunge down into Badwater Basin in Death Valley. That's almost 280 feet below sea level, the lowest and famously the hottest spot in North America.
So you can practically drive from, like, glaciers and alpine tundra to the hottest desert on Earth in just a couple of hours. It's a geological whiplash.
It really is. And that physical diversity creates this huge range of microclimates.
Yeah.
You get everything from damp, temperate rainforests up north to snowy mountains in the Sierra to the super arid Mojave and Death Valley deserts inland. It's great for biodiversity, but it creates massive engineering headaches, especially when it comes to the state's absolute lifeblood, water.
Ah, water, the source of endless conflict in California for, more than a century now.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Central Valley first, the agricultural heartland.
Right, the Central Valley. It's this huge, flat, incredibly fertile area right down the middle of the state, made up of the Sacramento Valley in the north and the San Joaquin Valley in the south. Even though parts of it are naturally pretty dry, semi-arid, this valley produces something like a quarter of all the food eaten in the U.S. It's the nation's biggest agricultural producer by far.
But that massive production is only possible because of massive engineering, isn't it? Because most of the rain and snow falls up north or in mountains, but the big farms and most of the people are down south and in the valley.
Exactly. This is where California's real ingenuity and its political muscle shows up. The water infrastructure is just phenomenal in scale. It's basically the world's largest engineered water system. It manages over 40 million acre-feet of water every year through this interconnected network of dams, reservoirs, canals, aqueducts, 6 main systems working together.
Give us a sense of what that actually involves. We're talking about making rivers flow where they wouldn't naturally go.
Oh yeah. We're talking about pumping colossal amounts of water uphill over mountain ranges across hundreds of miles. You've got the Federal Central Valley Project, the State Water Project, the Colorado River Aqueduct, and maybe the most famous or infamous, the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which essentially drained the Owens Valley east of the Sierra, sparking the first water wars back in the early 20th century. These systems use incredible amounts of electricity just to move the water to where it's needed, supplying drinking water for maybe 2/3 of the state's population. That's like 23 million people.
So this massive replumbing of the state is where the political fights come in. How do these water wars play out?
Well, the conflict is baked into a really complex, and some would say outdated, legal system. California water law has 2 main competing principles: riparian rights, which belong to people owning land right next to a river, and appropriative rights. Appropriative rights are based on first in time, first in right. Basically, whoever started using the water first, historically, gets priority, even if their farm is miles away from the river. And often, those senior rights belong to big agricultural users.
Which means farmers who got there early can sometimes claim water that cities or environmental groups argue is desperately needed elsewhere or needed to keep rivers healthy.
That's the core tension. It often pits the north, where the water originates, against the south, where the demand is highest. You have environmentalists trying to protect flows in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, which is this crucial ecological hub, against powerful agricultural interests in the Central Valley who rely on that water.
And is there one particular crop that symbolizes this fight?
If there's a poster child, it's probably almonds. California grows the vast majority of the world's almonds. It's very profitable, but almonds use a lot of water. So the debate becomes, should this state essentially be subsidizing water, often delivered at below market cost, to grow thirsty export crops like almonds, especially when drought is becoming more frequent and groundwater is being pumped out unsustainably? It's a huge fight over environment versus profit versus historical water rights.
And beyond water, the state's actual geology creates ongoing risks too. Earthquakes, obviously.
Yeah, earthquakes are a constant threat. Something like 2/3 of the entire nation's earthquake risk is concentrated in California. That's mainly because of the San Andreas Fault system, where the Pacific Plate and North American Plate are grinding past each other. The ground is literally unstable.
And the climate extremes create other hazards. You mentioned Death Valley's record heat, that 134 degrees Fahrenheit back in 1913 still holds the world record. But it's more than just heat, right?
Right. In the winter, you get these atmospheric rivers, the huge plumes of moisture coming off the Pacific that can cause intense flooding and landslides. Then in the fall, especially down south, you get the Santa Ana winds, hot, dry winds blowing out from the desert that dramatically increase wildfire danger. The geography offers incredible bounty, but also constant potential for disaster.
Okay, let's leap back to that giant economy, that $4.17 trillion GSP. It comes from California succeeding in really different, almost opposing sectors. It's like a dual economy.
That's a good way to put it. The first pillar is the one everyone thinks of: technology and innovation. Silicon Valley, down in the San Francisco Bay Area, is still the undisputed global center for tech. It's where the venture capital is, where the big ideas often start.
And the concentration of power there is just immense. You've got 3 of the world's 5 biggest tech companies: Apple, Meta, which is Facebook, Google, Alphabet, headquartered right there, plus Intel, Netflix, HP. The list goes on.
But that incredible success creates one of California's biggest internal problems, a real paradox the sources point to. All that wealth, especially from tech stock options and IPOs, generates huge tax revenue for the state. But at the same time,
It makes it impossible for regular people to afford to live there.
exactly. The housing crisis, the unbelievable cost of living, particularly in the Bay Area, is directly tied to the explosion of high-paying tech jobs, driving up demand for housing way faster than supply can keep up, partly due to restrictive local building policies. So tech success fuels the state budget, but also fuels the affordability crisis that's driving people out.
And beyond tech, California's cultural output is another huge economic driver.
Oh, absolutely. Culture and entertainment are massive escalate industries. Hollywood and the film industry are the obvious examples, shaping global entertainment for a century. But it's broader than that. California basically invented modern car culture, hot rods, cruising, all that. And musically, it's been a crucible for so many genres. The Bakersfield sound in country music, West Coast hip-hop, Bay Area thrash metal, surf music. Culture itself is a major California product.
Okay, so you have tech and culture, but the other pillar is more foundational, right? The physical economy. Tillage and trade, moving actual stuff.
Right. Despite all the water worries we talked about, California's farms and ranches still lead the entire country in agricultural output. Dairy, almonds, grapes, especially for wine, are huge. Even back around 2011, farm revenue was over $43 billion a year. It's a massive fundamental part of the economy, separate from the ups and downs of the stock market.
And its location makes it crucial for international trade. The ports.
Absolutely critical. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, right next to each other, form the single largest port complex in the U.S. by import volume. Think about this. Roughly 40% of all goods imported into the United States come through those two ports. That's nearly half the stuff America buys from overseas: electronics, clothes, furniture, you name it. It flows through that narrow bit of Southern California coastline. If those ports ever shut down for long, the whole U.S. economy feels it immediately.
Now, all this economic activity, this global connection, has shaped the population in big ways. California is still the biggest state by population, almost 40 million people, but it actually started losing population after 2020, right?
That's right, a historically significant shift. And the reasons people gave for leaving tied directly back to those economic paradoxes we discussed. Mainly the insanely high cost of living, the shortage of affordable housing, and high taxes. Between 2021 and 2022 alone, something like 800,000 people moved out. That, combined with lower birth rates, actually caused California to lose a seat in the U.S. Congress for the first time ever after the 2020 census.
Losing a congressional seat is a big deal, politically. But even with people leaving, the state's population is still incredibly diverse.
Oh, absolutely. By almost any measure, it's the most diverse state. Hispanics became the largest single ethnic group around 2014, making up nearly 40% of the population in the 2020 census. And this is key. Linguistically, while English is the official language, Spanish is spoken at home by over 28% of the population. That's more than 10 million people.
And that's not just recent immigration. It reflects those deep historical roots from the Spanish and Mexican eras. It's fundamentally a bilingual state in many ways.
For sure. Plus, California has the country's highest concentrations of people speaking languages like Chinese, Vietnamese, and Punjabi. That diversity fuels the workforce for both the tech and the agricultural engines, and it constantly reshapes the state's culture.
So we've gone from Queen Calafia's mythical island packed with griffins to the hard reality of the world's fourth biggest economy. An economy built on a really turbulent history, incredible feats of engineering to move water around, and this massive contradiction between tech wealth and the struggle for basic affordability. The sheer scale of California is, yeah, staggering.
And its role today often extends beyond just its economy. California has often been a political trendsetter, for better or worse. Think about things like the statewide recall election process, or being early on big issues like environmental laws or legalizing abortion.
But the way politics works inside California is kind of unique too, isn't it?
It's definitely contradictory. Right now, Democrats have a huge supermajority in the state legislature, overwhelming control. But a lot of major policy changes, especially on money matters, don't happen through the legislature. They happen because voters pass these complex ballot initiative propositions.
And there's probably no better example of that direct democracy having a massive, long-lasting impact than Proposition 13.
Oh, Prop 13. Passed by Beaters way back in 1978, it's arguably the single most consequential fiscal policy in modern California history. What it did, fundamentally, was slash property taxes and, crucially, cap how much the assessed value of a property could go up each year only 2%, or the rate of inflation, whichever is less unless the property is sold.
So what did that mean in practice?
Well, immediate, huge tax relief for people who already owned homes, especially if they'd owned them for a long time. But the flip side was it drastically cut funding for local governments, schools, public services. It shifted power over funding up to the state capital. And critically, by keeping assessed values low until a property sells, it created this huge incentive for people not to move, even if their house is way too big or small for them now. It choked housing turnover and directly feeds into the housing shortage and affordability crisis we were just talking about. There's a direct line from Prop 13 and 78 to today's housing problems.
Which brings us right up to the present day, where California seems to be using its political muscle to try and shape national politics, even as its own population growth has stalled.
Exactly. And maybe the clearest example of that is this thing called Proposition 50. According to our sources, Governor Newsom got the legislature to approve putting this on the ballot for November 2025. And what it aims to do is redraw California's congressional district map.
Now, redistricting happens after every census, but this sounds different. This sounds like a power play.
You could definitely call it that. It's not just a routine redraw. California lost that congressional seat, remember? So this seems like a very deliberate strategic move. The core idea behind Prop 50 appears to be a direct counter-move against efforts in states like Texas, where Republicans are looking to maximize their own congressional seats through aggressive redistricting. California seems to be using its own political power, the Democratic supermajority, the initiative process, to draw its map in a way that shores up Democratic seats and pushes back against that national shift in power.
So it's like California is leveraging its internal political structure and its remaining demographic weight, not just to manage its own affairs, but to actively fight a political battle on the national map.
That seems to be exactly what's happening. It's moving beyond just regulating tech or fighting over water. It's about using its electoral map as a tool to influence who controls Congress in Washington, D.C., using its large, diverse urban populations as the base for that strategy.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what does this all mean for you, trying to understand this incredibly complex place? We'll leave you with this question to think about. As California increasingly uses these kinds of institutional tools like Proposition 50 to deliberately shape its political geography and maintain national influence, is this high-stakes game of political map drawing going to define California's next chapter, even more than its massive economy, its cultural influence, or its constant battle with its own environment? The future of the Golden State, the world's fourth largest economy, might just depend on who gets to draw the lines.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you've ever, walked through a major capital city, London, Rome, D.C., you've definitely seen today's topic. It's a monument that seems pretty simple structurally, but it carries just this incredible weight of empires, thousands of years of history, human ingenuity. We are staring up at the obelisk.
Exactly. And it's way more than just a pillar, isn't it? It's like a physical record. It shows us this clash of ancient religion, imperial conquest, and, well, some truly staggering feats of engineering.
Yeah, staggering feels like the right word.
Yeah.
Now, when we talk about these, we should probably be precise. Our sources define the obelisk as, that tall, slender, four-sided shaft. It tapers up, ends in that little pyramid shape at the top, the pyramidion.
Right, the pyramidion.
But here's a really key distinction, historically speaking.
Okay.
The original ancient Egyptian ones, they were monolithic.
Ah, yeah, single stone.
Carved entirely from one massive piece of rock. Most modern ones, like, say, the Washington Monument, they're actually built up from lots of separate stones. Big difference.
Huge difference. And even the name we use, obelisk, that's got its own layer of history. The ancient Egyptians, the ones who really perfected this form, they called it tekinu.
Tekinu,
Yeah. The word obelisk actually comes from Greek, obeliskos, and it rather humorously means something like spit or nail, a pointed pillar.
A spit or a nail. That's kind of blunt for a, 400-ton monument, isn't it?
A little bit. Very descriptive, though.
A giant nail hammered into the ground of history, I guess. So our mission today, our deep dive, is to trace this object. First, understand its deep spiritual meaning back in Egypt.
Right, where it all started.
Then track its, frankly, bizarre journey across the globe. It became this prized object, often looted, taken as a symbol of conquest.
A trophy, really.
Exactly. And finally, we want to get into the dirt and sand, so to speak, and figure out the mind-boggling logistics. How on earth did they move and stand these colossal things up?
It's the ultimate lesson, isn't it? Practical physics meeting, well, divine ambition.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Egypt. The Nile. Obelisks were absolutely central, weren't they? Egyptian temples, religion.
Oh, completely. Always placed in pairs,
Yeah.
right at the massive entrances to the temples. You couldn't miss them.
A grand statement.
Definitely. And their role connects directly to the sun god Ra. But what's really fascinating is the conceptual idea behind the obelisk, especially during Akhenaten's time, his controversial religious changes.
Yeah, the Eton focus.
Exactly. The obelisk wasn't just symbolic of the sun or near it. It was described as a petrified ray of the Aten, the sun disk itself, like literally sunlight made solid stone.
Wow. So like a permanent phone line to the sun god? That's intense.
Pretty much. And the symbolism goes deeper. Our sources trace the shape back to the Benben stone.
Okay, the Ben stone. Now, that's not the physical capstone, right? That's the Pyramidion. The Ben is more mythological.
That's right. Good distinction. The Pyramidion is the physical cap you see. The Benben stone is the original mythical mound that supposedly rose out of the primordial waters, Numen, right at the dawn of creation in their stories.
Ah, okay, so when they put up these obelisks, they weren't just erecting a pillar, they were kind of recreating the moment the world began.
Exactly. Tapping into that primordial power, reenacting creation itself at the temple gateway.
So if they're recreating the moment of creation, why always in pairs? Is it just doubling down on the symbolism? Or do the two pillars maybe represent something else? Duality? The horizon, maybe?
That's a great question. The texts aren't always super explicit about the why too aspect, but one really compelling idea ties into watching the sky. Astronomy.
Okay.
Well, the tapering shapes, both the pyramid and the obelisk, they might have been inspired by things you actually see in the sky around sunrise and sunset. Things like sun pillars or zodiacal light, these vertical beams of light.
Natural phenomena.
Yeah. So if the shape mimics those light columns appearing on the horizon, then putting up two pillars could literally frame the sun god's journey, framing the sunrise and sunset.
They were building celestial gateposts. That's amazing. And we can still see one in its original spot, right?
We can. The oldest temple obelisk, still standing where it was first erected, it's the obelisk of Senusret the 12th dynasty.
Right, in modern Heliopolis.
Yep. Red granite, 120 metric tons. It's been there for, nearly 4,000 years. A powerful reminder of just how ancient this tradition is.
And it wasn't just the Egyptians either. The idea spread.
Oh, yeah. It definitely influenced neighbors. You see the Nubian kings, 25th dynasty. They also built these very Egyptian-style monuments. King Pi, for instance, he put up an obelisk.
Same style.
Pretty much Egyptianizing,
Right.
yeah. But they were practical. They used local black granite instead of hauling it all the way from Aswan. Smart move. It shows this was a major architectural statement across that whole region, the Middle Nile.
But the obelisk story, it doesn't stay purely spiritual, does it? It takes a really sharp turn towards imperialism.
Absolutely. When Rome conquers Egypt around 30 BCE, everything changes for the obelisk. The Romans didn't just admire them from afar, they wanted them. They systematically looted temple complexes.
Looted is the word. The sheer scale of it is kind of hard to grasp.
It really is. If you just look at the numbers today, there are actually more ancient Egyptian obelisks standing outside Egypt now, mostly in Rome, than are left in Egypt itself.
That's incredible. So they became the ultimate status symbol for Rome.
The ultimate imperial trophy, proof that Rome had conquered the ancient mystical land of the pharaohs.
And there are two giants in Rome that really define this obsession, aren't there?
Oh, yeah. You've got the Lateran obelisk. That holds the record. Largest standing ancient monolithic obelisk in the world. It's, 32.2 meters tall? And weighs a terrifying 455 metric tons.
455 tons.
Yeah.
Just, wow.
And the other famous one? The Vatican obelisk. The one in the middle of St. Peter's Square. Smaller, but still massive. 25 meters, 331 tons. Emperor Caligula brought that one over in 37 CE. And the story of just getting it there is legendary in itself.
Yes. Pliny the Elder wrote about this, didn't he? The special barge they had to build.
He did. It needed this enormous mast made of fir wood. Pliny claims it was so thick, 4 men couldn't link arms around it.
Unbelievable. And they needed ballast, too.
Tons of it. Apparently 120 bushels of lentils just to keep this huge top-heavy ship stable on the journey. Can you imagine calculating that? Okay, guys, how many lentils for a 331-ton stone?
It sounds almost comical, the lentils part. But the really telling part, the real display of Roman power, is what happened after the obelisks arrived, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Once that gigantic barge delivered its cargo, they didn't, repair it or reuse it for something else. No.
What did they do?
They filled it with stones and concrete, essentially, and deliberately sank it.
Sank it. On purpose.
Yep. Sank it right there to form the foundation of the new harbor quay they were building at Ostia, the port of Rome.
Wait, so this wasn't just practical disposal. It was a statement. A flex, as we'd say today.
The ultimate flex.
We have so much wealth, so many resources, we could just build the most complex transport vessel maybe ever conceived up to that point, use it once, and then sink it to make part of a dock.
Exactly. It screams imperial dominance. The sheer scale and honestly the wastefulness of it is just a testament to Rome's perceived endless power and resources at the time.
Incredible. And, while Egypt is the origin, it's worth remembering that this idea, the tall, tapering monumental pillar, it pops up elsewhere too.
Yeah, the basic form seems almost universal for marking importance. You look at, say, the Assyrian Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III, found in modern Iraq.
Different style, though.
Oh yeah, stylistically very different. Not monolithic in the same way. It's a ceremonial four-sided pillar, but it's covered in reliefs depicting military victories and conquered kings paying tribute. Shows Jehu, the Israelite king, bowing down. So it's about power, but more earthly power.
Conquest, not creation.
Pretty much. And then, way across the Atlantic, totally separate development, you have things like the Tello Obelisk in Peru, pre-Columbian.
Also monolithic.
Yep, a single stone stele covered in these really intricate Chavin symbols. So it seems like creating these tall, permanent, inscribed pillars is just something major civilizations do. It's a fundamental impulse.
Right. Fast forward quite a bit through the centuries. The obelisk's meaning shifts again, doesn't it? Less about gods or conquest, more about human mastery, engineering skill, especially in the Renaissance.
Definitely. And that brings us to one of the most famous engineering spectacles of the 16th century, the re-erection of that Vatican obelisk.
The one Caligula brought over.
The very same one. It had been lying down for centuries. Pope Sixtus V decided he wanted it standing proud in front of the new St. Peter's Basilica in 1586. The job went to an architect-engineer named Domenico Fontana.
And this was a huge deal.
Oh, massive. Remember, it's 331 tons. Fontana had to move it across the piazza and then lift it upright on land without, Roman-era massive shipyards or modern cranes. It was an organizational masterpiece. Took nearly 1,000 men.
1,000 workers.
Yep. Almost 1,000 men, 140 cart horses pulling ropes, and 47 specially designed cranes and windlasses. Just imagine coordinating that.
The noise alone must have been incredible.
But the product's legacy wasn't just getting the stone up, was it?
No, not at all. You're thinking of the book he published afterwards.
Exactly.
Fontana meticulously documented the entire process, calculations, drawings, everything. He published this amazing book full of detailed copperplate etchings showing the scaffolding, the ropes, the machines, the sequence of operations.
Like an instruction manual for moving mountains. Pretty much. And it got circulated widely across Europe. It became this landmark publication, setting a completely new standard for how you communicate complex technical and engineering information. It was almost engineering PR, showing off the brilliance involved.
Engineering is art and science communication.
Mm-hmm.
And that desire, that global fascination with these ancient Egyptian giants, it didn't stop there.
Nope. The 19th century saw another wave. 3 more big ones got shipped out of Egypt. The 2 known as Cleopatra's Needles. One went to London, the other to New York.
Right, I've seen the one in London.
And the Luxor Obelisk, which now stands in the Place de la Concorde in Paris. These became huge symbols for those imperial capitals, too.
And today, the form still resonates, even if they're not ancient monoliths anymore.
Absolutely. The obelisk shape still signifies permanence, commemoration, state power. Think of the Washington Monument. Okay, it's masonry built from blocks, not monolithic, but the shape is pure obelisk. Same for the monument to the people's heroes in Beijing or the obelisk of Buenos Aires. They all use that visual language.
It's quite versatile, too. You see smaller ones used as grave markers. Beethoven's tomb, for example.
Right. Or even just as decorative elements, like those little obelisks you see lining the Via della Conciliazione in Rome, the road leading to St. Peter's. They actually double as lampposts.
From a sacred sun symbol to a street lamp, that's quite a journey.
It really tells a story, doesn't it?
Okay, let's get into the really nitty-gritty now.
Yep.
The physics. How do you actually move, let alone stand up? A 455-ton single piece of stone without hydraulics, without massive diesel engines, the logistics just seem almost impossible.
This is where the deep dive gets really fascinating, I think. And thankfully, we have more than just speculation. Modern researchers, like the team on that Novier experiment back in 1999, they've used experimental archaeology, trying to replicate the ancient methods.
Okay, so what did they find? How do you even start to move something that heavy?
Well, they started smaller. They ran towing trials with a still respectable 25-ton block, and they actually failed the first couple of times.
Failed?
They underestimated the friction massively. Finally, they figured out a system using a wooden sledge, moving it over a prepared path with wooden rails, kept constantly wet to reduce friction. And they used big levers to kind of nudge it forward inch by inch.
Okay, wet rails, levers, sounds plausible, but the manpower needed.
Ah, yeah, this is the kicker. For that 25-ton block, It took 130 people pulling ropes simultaneously, plus more people working the levers.
130 people for 25 tons.
And even then, they only managed to move it about 10 to 20 feet in an entire day's work.
10 feet a day.
Maybe 20 on a good day.
Yeah.
So you have to completely recalibrate your idea of manual labor when you imagine moving the ladder in Obelisk, which is nearly 20 times heavier. The scale is just monumental.
Monumental labor for a monumental stone. It's staggering. And that's just moving it on land. What about by river? We know the granite came from Aswan, way up the Nile.
Right, the Nile was the highway, so they also looked into the kind of barge you'd need, especially for the biggest obelisks.
What did they find?
The calculations and experiments suggested the ancient barges would have had to be enormous, roughly 200 feet long, but about 100 feet wide.
Wait, 100 feet wide? That's almost square.
Almost. That incredibly wide 2-to-1 length-to-width ratio, it seems that was crucial for stability, to prevent this immensely heavy concentrated load from just tipping the whole vessel over, especially if the Nile got a bit choppy.
Okay, so a giant, super stable, custom-built barge gets it, eventually, to the temple site. But then comes the really scary part, right? Standing it up.
Mm-hmm.
How do you lift something that tall, that heavy, without the whole thing just snapping under its own weight or the ground giving way?
This is where the ancient engineers were truly brilliant. The most convincing method, proven again by that 1999 experiment, is the sandpit method.
The sand pit. Okay, how does that work?
You build a massive ramp leading up to the pedestal where the obelisk will stand. But directly in front of the pedestal, you dig a big pit, and you fill that pit completely with dry sand.
Dry sand. Why dry?
Critical point. Dry sand flows very evenly and predictably, unlike wet sand or just dirt. So you maneuver the obelisk, base first, down the ramp until its bottom edge is resting over the sand-filled pit.
Okay, it's lying horizontally over the pit.
Exactly. Then you have teams of workers controlling ropes, mainly for stability and guidance. And slowly, carefully, methodically, you start removing the dry sand from underneath the base of the obelisk, letting it flow out of chutes or openings at the bottom of the pit.
Ah. So as the sand level drops,
Gravity takes over. The base of the obelisk slowly, gently tilts downwards into the emptying space.
you're letting controlled gravity do most of the heavy lifting.
Precisely. Gravity does the vast majority of the work, tilting the obelisk up towards vertical. It continues tilting until the base catches an especially designed turning groove on the pedestal. We actually find these grooves on ancient pedestals, which is strong evidence.
So the groove stops it sliding out.
Right. And this sand-draining gravity tilting process gets the obelisk maybe 75 degrees upright, pretty much most of the way. Only for the final maybe 15 degrees or so do you need the big teams pulling hard on ropes to haul it the rest of the way to perfectly vertical.
That is ingenious, using sand as a giant slow-motion hydraulic jack, almost.
It's incredibly clever. And the best part, we have written evidence too, not just the physical grooves.
Really?
There's a 3,000-year-old papyrus scroll, an administrative document. It actually contains instructions for a scribe telling him to oversee the work, end quote. Empty the space that has been filled with sand beneath the monument of thy Lord.
No way. That's amazing. Direct confirmation from 3,000 years ago.
It's pretty incredible documentation. It confirms the theory beautifully. It shows this blend of, profound religious motivation, the monument of thy Lord, and incredibly practical, clever engineering.
The obelisk really does connect those two worlds, doesn't it? The spiritual fervor of the ancient Egyptians and the sheer mechanical precision and ingenuity of their engineers. It's kind of the perfect symbol for both human faith and human capability.
Well put. It embodies both.
So, wrapping this up, what does this journey of the obelisk tell us today? What's the takeaway?
Well, we've seen it morph, haven't we? From this deeply sacred, monolithic sun symbol in Egypt
Right.
to becoming the ultimate statement of imperial conquest and power for Rome.
The trophy.
Yeah. And then centuries later, its re-erection becomes this defining moment for Renaissance engineering prowess and technical communication. It's such a simple geometric form, yet it carries all these layers of meaning, and it still defines monumental scale for us today across totally different cultures and times.
A simple shape with a profoundly complex story. And just to leave you, our listeners, with one final thought, something to really mull over about the scale we've been talking about. Consider that sandpit method again.
Oh.
To erect the truly huge obelisks, like the Lateran one, think about the infrastructure needed just for the erection process itself, that ramp, the platform over the pit. Estimates suggest it would have required over 1 million cubic meters of material.
1 million cubic meters of stone, mud brick, sand.
Exactly. Just to build the temporary setup needed to raise the actual monument.
Wow. So the temporary structure, the scaffolding essentially, was itself a colossal engineering project, a mountain built just to stand up a pillar.
Makes you think, doesn't it? Until next time on The Deep Dive.